Want to scam me? Sure, but watch how I accidentally make money off it. Years ago, I was quite involved in an active online community of analog audio hobbyists. People would occasionally put hardware and music up for sale on the message board we used. I'd been looking for a specific piece of hardware for several years to no avail. It was extremely rare and had never been sold in the US, so any examples would have been imported from Japan. One of these machines popped up for sale from someone in the community and I jumped on it. The guy offering it wasn't new but wasn't terribly active. Somehow he'd obtained pics that weren't on the net and or not easily searchable and ginned up a fake Japanese bill of sale. In hindsight, he may have seen one for sale and stolen the images from that. Regardless, it all seemed legitimate enough to induce me to go through with the transaction. So, PayPal sent and he says it'll ship in about a week. Then, the excuses begin. From he's been busy to out of town to his assistant shipped it but didn't send the tracking number to providing a fake tracking number. Then, he just quit responding to calls or emails. Turns out the number he'd given me was a forwarding service that he subsequently disconnected. He also disappeared from the forum. He had, however, used his real name and a real PayPal account. I filed a PayPal claim, and of course they denied the claim on some technicality. I'm sure he was counting on this occurring. This is where the revenge begins with an unintended bonus. All I wanted was to make sure the guy knew I'd find him and get to him. I'd called the police and reported matters but they couldn't have given less of a damn. I decided to find him myself, and found an old wedding announcement that had been posted on the net. I searched his wife's name and found mention of her being out on leave to give birth to their first child on her work website. Bingo. I had a small gift sent to her workplace with my name on it, and called her work to say that I'm an old friend and don't have their contact info but wanted to wish them congratulations on the new child, and that I'd come see him soon. I had visions of his wife saying how nice it is that someone sent a gift to her work, etc. and asking who I was. This apparently spooked him, because a cashier's check showed up for the full amount. Now, what he hadn't counted on, and I didn't tell him, was that I'd filed a chargeback with American Express after PayPal denied the claim. My conundrum was this: the Amex investigation was ongoing, and I had no idea if they'd overturn the chargeback or not. I also had no idea if the cashier's check was legit. I've heard of counterfeit checks being returned up to 45 days later, so I truly didn't intend to profit off this. But I did. The Amex chargeback was resolved in my favor, which PayPal clawed back from his account, shortly after the check was proven good. The kicker is, the guy had the gall to email and threatened to try to have me charged with fraud for the chargeback when he'd already sent the check. I simply responded and said, "Hey, great to finally hear from you. Glad you're doing well. How's the baby? Listen, I'm sure there's just been a mix-up and I'll be happy to pay everything just as soon as I get the machine. I'm sure you understand why I want to receive it before I pay at this point. Of course, if you do want to call the police, you're welcome to explain to them how you attempted to defraud me by selling something you never possessed in the first place. Your call." Never heard another word. I just hope his kid didn't have to go without diapers. What was the scariest thing you've experienced in your life? I have a story for y'all that'll give you shivers to your bones. Let me warn you, it's about something that happened to me a couple of years ago, and I still can't shake the fear from my mind. It was a regular Thursday afternoon, and I was coming back home from work. I live in an apartment complex on the outskirts of the city, and it's usually pretty quiet around here. But, as I was getting out of my car, I noticed a strange-looking man walking towards me. He had a sinister aura around him, and his eyes looked empty, like there was no soul behind them. I tried not to think much about it and made my way to the elevator. But as I pressed the button, I noticed that the man was following me, like his eyes were glued to the back of my head. I started to feel uneasy, but I didn't want to show him that. As the elevator door opened, I made my way inside, and he followed. We were both heading to the same floor, and I remember feeling my heart beating faster in my chest. When we reached my floor, I quickly ran out of the elevator and made my way towards my door. But before I could turn the key, he grabbed me from behind and put his hand over my mouth so that I couldn't scream. I struggled against his grip, but it was too strong. He then cut a hole in my blouse with a knife and ripped it apart. I was so scared, and I didn't know what to do. But then something snapped inside of me, and I decided that I wasn't going to be his victim. I kicked and screamed and somehow managed to break away from him. I ran towards my neighbor's apartment, and thankfully, they were home. I told them everything that had happened, and they helped me call the cops. The police arrived quickly, and they searched the area, but the man was long gone. They never found him, but they did find out that he had broken into my apartment. He had stolen some of my valuables and even left a message on my wall that said, "I'll be back." Even though it's been years, I still can't shake off the fear from that day. The thought of someone invading my privacy and threatening my life still gives me the chills. Karen assaults a pregnant woman, so you won't believe what happens next. I used to be a service manager at one of the biggest locations of a popular Mexican grill. I won't say which, but guac was $1.95 extra and we were required to ask everyone if they were okay paying that price. One Sunday morning, our second busiest shift of the week, 2 of my line people called out, so we were struggling to get all of our prep done before opening at 11. We are just wrapping up when in comes Karen 10 minutes before opening through the side door marked employees only with 15 preteen girls in tow. My cook recognizes her as she regularly comes in during the dinner shift and is extremely abusive and cruel to all the Latino workers. Karen tells me they can order whatever they want, throws her credit card at me and goes to sit down at a table and diddle on her phone. Now I can't ring up her order without her standing there because of the company rules, and I am 30 weeks pregnant and just want to take my break. Prego waddled over to Karen's table to try and inform her of that when she literally flicks her hand at me to dismiss me. Not only have I been at the store since 7 and done 2 different people's jobs on top of my own, I have my son's head grinding against my pelvic bones and kicking me like crazy. I am in no mood. When I try to tell her again, she looks at me with what I can only describe as seething contempt and says what part of they can get whatever they want. Did you not understand? I don't care what you charge me as long as I get a receipt. Don't interrupt me again or I'll get your fat ass fired. Now I never cry, but that almost got me. Motherhood is awesome but pregnancy sucks. I finally managed to pick my jaw off the ground and stammer, all right, ma'am, I'll ring up whatever they want and bring you a receipt. The girls were really nice and most of them ordered double meat and they all got a bottled water and chips and guac. Every last one. My cashier and I are just vibrating with glee as we ring them up and watch the bill climb to like $250. I brought the bill to Karen and was pretty excited when she didn't immediately check it. I made my own food and told the cook to come get me when the show starts. I'm halfway done eating when I see him waving to the camera, howling with laughter, so I head up. Karen is foaming at the mouth screaming for the manager, and when she sees that manager is me, she literally grinds her teeth and slaps her receipt on the table. She manages to choke out the word refund. The girls have all pretty much finished their food, so I inform her that I won't be doing that because I would lose my job for giving away that much critical inventory, meat, guac, cheese, for free. Then I gently remind her that she told me twice that they could get anything as long as she got a receipt. She just keeps demanding a refund and calling me stupid and fat, again, pregnant. At this point, her screaming is holding up the very long line and customers are shouting at her to just leave. That's when she pushed me effing hard. My cashier caught me so I didn't fall down, but 2 of our regulars, who are police, see it and immediately cuff her. In this state, any use of physical force against a pregnant woman is classified as aggravated battery or something like that. I felt bad for the kids and I was fine, so I kept telling them I didn't want to press charges, but they said that at that point it didn't matter because the woman had done it in front of on-duty officers, so she getting arrested. They had to call the kids' parents to come get them because she was their church's youth leader and get statements. My GM came in and let me go home with a full day's pay. She tried to take the case to trial, but they had video and like 20 witness statements, so she ended up taking a couple years probation or something. All because I did exactly what she told me to. My parents make me sleep in the backyard. I'm a single man in my early 30s. My brother is 29, and he's got 4 kids now. His wife, my sister-in-law, and I do not get along, as she always likes to try and get a rise out of me by acting superior. Then turns into an extreme self-victimizing drama queen if I retaliated against her in any way. She can cry in an instant and can put on an extremely convincing show to get sympathy from just about anyone. My parents and brother absolutely adore her, even though they know exactly how she really is and just don't care. She's very good looking, I'll give her that, but she's so awful that I could never be attracted to her. She also refuses to get any sort of job, even though she has a college degree, and my mother willingly helps with the kids all day, so their finances are entirely dependent on my brother. This also means they can't afford to live anywhere but my parents' house, and privacy is a bit of an issue with all of them under one roof in a 3-bedroom house that was built in the 60s. Growing up, my younger brother was also the obvious favorite. We're 3 years apart in age, but he developed a superiority complex because I was badly punished if I retaliated against his antics in any way back then. It was obvious my parents cared for him a lot more because he got the lion's share of everything unless people called them out on it. Which did happen a fair bit by other members of family, which is why my parents packed us all up and moved us about 150 miles away from them, so they generally would only see us on holidays since it was a 3-hour drive. My brother got physically abusive towards me on a number of occasions, flirted relentlessly with my first girlfriend to the point she broke up with me, and laughed at any misfortune I had. And my parents just told me to suck it up whenever I was upset about it. I only got equal treatment when my parents wanted to keep up appearances. I admit it was rather funny to see the looks on their faces whenever they had to treat me equal to my brother on birthdays and Christmas because other people were present. We had relatives that were very nosy, and loved gossiping drama, so my parents did their best to hide what was really going on, and threatened to take all my stuff away if I didn't keep my mouth shut. If anything, it just made my parents celebrate more when I turned 18 and moved out because it meant they no longer had to provide for me. I wasn't even done with high school yet when I moved out, but couch surfing was far better than living with them. I was low contact ever since leaving home. They didn't even show up for my high school graduation, but I really didn't care. From that point on, I would usually only see my parents and brother on holidays like the rest of the family. The start 2020 pandemic was not kind to me. I lost my job, and couldn't renew the lease on the condo because my roommate also lost his job and neither of us could afford the place on unemployment money. It was a rented 2-bedroom condo that I really loved. As the lease was ending, my roommate left early to move back in with relatives, and I had to sell nearly all of my stuff because I was soon going to be homeless if I didn't downsize to an extreme. I really shouldn't have rented a place that was so expensive, but I liked living the high life, until that life wasn't kind to me, and I realized I should have been living somewhere far cheaper so I could have saved more money to fall back on. But I had a plan. I own a truck simply for the fact that I've always loved trucks, so I found a $1,000 camper in good shape and put it on my truck just so I could live out of it for a while. It was supposed to be temporary, but I ended up living out of it far longer than I ever thought. I originally was hoping to be able to live out of the camper at my parents' house, where my brother and his family still reside as well. But when I asked my parents to let me stay for a while, they told me they had a full house, and didn't want me there. Plus, we hadn't exactly gotten along in the past decade. They said they'd only agree to let me park my camper there if I paid them basically what it'd cost to rent an apartment in my area. That was way too much just to park my camper. I was jobless and trying to save as much of my unemployment money as I could till I could find a new job. I may as well be living in an apartment with that rent price they were asking. My parents called my camper an eyesore and told me to take a hike since we couldn't come to an agreement. And sister-in-law thought it was absolutely hilarious I had to live in a camper. My brother joined her in pointing at and mocking me while calling me a homeless bum. I parked my truck/camper in a store parking lot to sleep on the first night that I had nowhere else to go. I felt scared out of my mind that someone might try to break in. Suffice to say I didn't sleep well that night. There was nowhere else I could go as any other relatives that owned houses were fairly far away, and all my friends were all apartment people. And I was pretty attached to my area as well, so I didn't want to just leave. I'd also had my mail forwarded to a friend's apartment. It was the only way I could still get my mail anymore. Finding a stable place to park was pretty difficult. I went looking around to try and find a job similar to my old one. It took months of living the nomadic camper life. In that time, I had to deal with a lot. Everything from beggars and drug addicts, to people demanding I leave because my camper was an eyesore. At one point someone who told me to move claimed to be with an HOA. I wasn't even parked on a street with houses. And when I questioned what HOA, they got incredibly belligerent and threatened me. I moved my camper anyway just to avoid the trouble. In order to have a steady supply of electricity I learned to use a long extension cord to plug in anywhere I could to recharge my camper batteries. This meant sneaking around and plugging it into an outside outlet of a random building while parked on a street. I know that's a crummy thing to do, but I had to keep my batteries charged so my refrigerator would stay cold. I had a small solar power bank for recharging my phone, but I didn't have anything like a generator, and generators are noisy and require fuel anyway, so I did what I had to do. After months of living like that, I finally managed to get a new job. I had to move to the neighboring city to find a job that didn't involve retail. I worked retail while in college and promised myself never again. Though I was nearly ready to break that promise. I was still getting unemployment money, but I had no stable place to live while receiving it, and I didn't want to still be jobless when it ran out. Plus I was bored out of my mind. I had little else to do but read, watch movies on a small portable DVD player, use my phone or laptop, and keep note of where I could park and what local public bathrooms I could use. I kind of envy that the Japanese have public bathhouses. We could really use stuff like that over here. When I finally landed a new job, I practically lived in the back lot of the building by the warehouse in old employee parking spaces literally no one else seemed to bother using because they were so far in the back that the area was borderline forgotten. My boss/company owner actually liked this arrangement because I was willingly available to take any shift I could get, so long as I had enough sleep. He even let me take the camper off my truck and set it up in one of the spaces so I could drive around without it. Not exactly sure if this was legal, but no one bothered us about it. The entire time I lived back there, I didn't have to deal with many trespassers. There were a few, but the security guards escorted them out. I was pretty much on call almost all the time when they needed me, and was working virtually every day of the week. My boss let me plug my camper into the building for power and water, and I paid a small amount of rent by working for free on Sundays when no one else was in the office but the janitor and security guard. Beyond that I usually had to shower at a friend's apartment, or at my local gym as the camper didn't have a shower in it, and only a portable toilet. And I didn't want to fill it because emptying it is a nasty chore, so I used other bathrooms as often as I could. I had a key to the warehouse, and could go in to use the bathroom there at any hour. I was even on a first-name basis with the night security guard. He's since become one of my closest friends. The camper was silenced to heat in the winter with a small electric heater. Summers were not fun though. The camper didn't have AC, so I had to get a used portable air conditioner just to make it bearable. I made a lot of overtime pay, and hands-on learned some new skills from other employees. Eventually midway into this year I landed a better position in the company as a supervisor, and started making a better salary than my old job. That's when I decided I wanted a house. The scare I'd gotten from losing my condo made me realize I needed something much more stable for the long term. I looked around for something close to my work, and just 2 miles away found a 3-bedroom manufactured home on a small property. But I managed to get it for $10,000 less than the asking price somehow. I used nearly my entire savings for a down payment and got approved for a home loan. I finally didn't have to live in a camper anymore. There was enough space for me to back my truck in behind the house to take the camper off to set it up in the backyard. So I put it there as its own little building just in case I want to use it again. When I was fully settled in the house, I was dumb enough to brag about it on my book of faces. My family saw the post, and that's where this SHT really starts. After a few weeks my parents and brother along with his family came to visit completely unannounced to have a tour of my home. I didn't even give them my address. So how they found out where I live, I still don't know. None of my friends have fessed up, and no prior family members visited me before that. So I wonder if they stalked me at work and followed me home or something. It really wouldn't surprise me. Once I opened the door, they practically all shoved their way in like rambunctious tourists. Then just started making themselves at home. They all kept poking around and sister-in-law had this creepy smirk that she was repeatedly flashing me. And it was only later that I figured out why. And it made me madder than a bull on steroids that just got stung by a hornet. My parents were constantly talking about how I've got so much extra space now, and it's too much for someone like me who has no wife or kids. Sure, not now. but maybe someday, and my brother kept remarking about how there was more space than our parents' house, and my house was closer to his job too. Red flags all around, I know. Eventually my brother asked me to speak privately. Everyone else suddenly left the room and piled out onto the front porch. That's what finally made me realize they'd planned something. My brother, let's call him Dan for the sake of simplicity, said the house was too much for me alone, and I should let him move in with his family because his wife is pregnant with kid number 4, and my house is much closer to his job. He pointed out that I already have the camper, so I could just live in that outside while they live in the main house. And I'd like to point out that Dan never once spoke of offering rent. Mind you, he's got a good job. He also started talking about how there would be changes, and even curfews, and that I couldn't just walk in at any time without prior notice. If it weren't my brother, I'd think the person I was talking to had lost their mind. But Dan lost his marbles long ago thanks to our parents treating him like he was the center of the world. I tried to speak, but he kept talking over me as if I had no say in the matter. There was no way in hell I'd rent my house or parts of my house to him. Other people maybe, just so I can pay the mortgage off more easy, but certainly not him, or his nasty wife. I've heard of this exact kind of situation in videos online many times, and never once did I think I'd actually live it because I thought it so ludicrous. But my parents, brother and sister-in-law do all fit the bill for a bunch of narcissistic entitled crazies. So I picked up my phone and set it to start recording, then just held onto it. Dan didn't even seem to care or notice that I'd done this, and just sat there with his arms waving around while talking about all the reasons of why he needed my house. Then went from saying that to acting like it was a done deal and trying to reach out his hand to shake mine. That's when I finally showed my backbone and said hell no, and I said it loud enough that Dan stumbled backward for a second. I'd rarely ever raised my voice to him on that level because I was punished by our parents whenever I did. But this was my house, not theirs. My spine can be as shiny as it wants here. I stood up and then told him that my house was not up for grabs, and acting like I'll let him move in just because they want it won't make it happen. I bought my house for me, and it's not my fault he keeps having more kids and has to keep living with our parents because he can't afford to move out. Dan got as physically close to me as he could without actually touching me and said that I didn't deserve the house, and he needed a better place for his family to live. I laughed back in his face and said that was total bullshit because I worked hard to be able to buy my house. Of course I deserved it. Dan started yelling that I have no wife or kids, and I don't need all the space, so I may as well give it to him. I said I'm not giving him anything, and he never even offered to pay me rent. If I let him move in, I'd still be covering the entire mortgage on my own house without even being able to live in my own house. When did you realize you married the wrong person? When I realized that my wife loved playing Final Fantasy XIV to the neglect of our own relationship. She loved it so much she offed herself. She had had a problem with obsessively playing World of Warcraft in the past, and we broke up over it, and she quit the game cold turkey and got a job. So we made up and then we got married. Not long after the marriage, she was back into the gaming, but now it was Final Fantasy XIV, and we never had any quality time as a couple to just talk. All she ever wanted to do in her free time was drink wine and play her game. My wife was an alcoholic. She died recently, and in the course of going through her things I found out why. Her iPad message history revealed that she had had a whole string of in-game boyfriends the whole time we were together. 12 years, lots of SX text messages I found. The night she died, she was excited and happy because she just married her current boyfriend, in-game, but she partied a little too hard that night and drank herself to death. I messaged one of her guildmates to find out what happened. Turns out, no one ever knew she was married in real life. She never talked about me, but she sure did flirt with a lot of guys when she was drunk, and the guy she married in-game was, himself, married in real life. We live in the United States but she liked to play on European servers and meet European guys, and I had been on a business trip to Germany for a week the night she died. She was so angry at me for not taking her with me, but it was a business trip and not a vacation. I realize now that what she really wanted was an opportunity to screw her Italian boyfriend while I was at work. She had the Duolingo app on her phone to learn Italian, and her browser history showed that she had been looking up Italian cooking recipes. My wife never cooked, so she was clearly thinking about an in-person meetup at some point. I was grieving the loss of my wife when I found all of this out, and now I'm dealing with a lot of anger too. If she hadn't died and somehow I found this out, I'd be divorcing her right now. The time I realized I delivered pizza to a unaliver. I had worked at a big pizza chain for almost a year at this point, so I was aware of a lot of the dangers of the job, robberies, intoxicated morons, naked people, etc. But this instance really made it sink in. A girl had been reported missing in our area under super suspicious circumstances. It was a big deal in a relatively small town where things like that don't happen super frequently. It was all over the news, billboards were being put up, the whole shebang. We had state cops, other county cops, and federal investigators all in town to help. A few weeks after the initial report, they announced an arrest. They had the guy pinned to rights. No question that he was the one who did it. When I got to work that day someone asked me if I had seen the announcement. I hadn't yet, so I pulled up the news article on my phone. Holy crap, I know that name. I know that address. I know that face. A month or so prior, I had delivered to this guy. His apartment complex was a few blocks down the road. To add to the creep factor, this dude lived in a complex with several buildings where each one had a locked door to get into the building. It's full of young kids that are almost always intoxicated and ignorant when they order, and I'd had issues there before. Due to that, I made a point to always have customers come and meet me at the main door as opposed to being buzzed in and going to their unit door. Usually it wasn't a huge deal, but this dude really tried to press the issue and had several excuses to why he couldn't come down and I needed to come up. Each one was met with company policy doesn't allow me to do that until he finally caved and came down. He was less than enthused, but paid for his pizza and I went about my way. But once I walked, I could just smell the aroma of rancid spoiled meat, and I always wondered where it came from. I guess I know now. My wife was in a coma and I read her diary for comfort. I wish I never had. My wife was in a bad accident a few months ago that resulted in her being in an 8-day coma. Obviously when she went into the coma, no one knew at the time how long it was going to last. I was envisioning months, if not years, before she would ever wake up. If she ever did, it truly felt like I had lost her already. I was destroyed with grief and the weight of all the uncertainty. Every day that passed with no good news further plunged me into despair. We have been married for 10 years. We have traveled the world together. We are truly each other's best friend. I was seriously considering the worst things if they told us she would never wake up. One night, I was in our bedroom and really going through it. It was probably the 5th or 6th day. I was emotionally and physically exhausted and drained from it all. Another day of no good news. I was laying on her side of the bed because it still smelled like her and it was comforting to me. She used to put on lotion at night before we got into bed, so I opened her nightstand drawer to get the bottle and saw her diary there. I have never gone through her things or her diary before, but that night I just wanted some piece of her. I don't know why I didn't just reread our old texts or something. I wasn't really thinking too logically. It's not an excuse, but it is what it is. I began to read her diary. She didn't write every day, so sometimes entries could be days or months apart. This diary was started about 3 years ago. Very quickly I realized that almost all of the entries were angry ones. Angry about female friends or social media followers. Long paragraphs about how they were home wreckers and ugly/talentless/whatever negative trait. She would become furious if a woman followed me on social media or if we ran into a friend in real life. She wrote pages about these women and how she wanted them to die or have their lives destroyed. She was angry that I, quote, basked in all the attention and didn't remove female followers online. She was angry if a woman followed me and didn't also immediately follow her account because, quote again, we are a package deal, not that they know any decency to respect that. She wrote long rants about how women know the nuances of social media interactions and this somehow proved for certain that they wanted me and were actively trying to disrespect our relationship by only following me and not her. I need to stress that none of the women she was angry about have ever messaged me inappropriately or acted in any way besides a friendly manner towards me. These were high school or hometown friends mostly. A big common element many of them had was knowing or being friends with exes of mine. She raged on about how I should not be allowing them to glimpse into our lives, and she suspected they were reporting back to my exes. To be honest with you, the entries were very unhinged and angry. Then I read some entries about how she had messaged some of them from secret accounts. I am summarizing here, but basically over the course of 12 years she has messaged and harassed several women and subtly accused them of trying to sleep with me or disrespect our relationship. She pretended to be an anonymous person from our hometown and would tell them things like she's heard rumors they're homewreckers and just weird manipulative shit that would result in the person deleting me without ever telling me why. Like years of this. Any new person who added me and not her was immediately a problem, and she made sure they knew it somehow in a way that would never blow back on her but still got them away from me. So much made sense. Friends who had ghosted me over the years. People who blocked me. People who didn't say hi in public anymore. It's not like hundreds of people, but definitely 10 to 15 who I just never understood what happened. I would mention these things to her and she would seem comforting and try to reassure me and then ask innocently if maybe they had a thing for me. Always non-threateningly. Always saying something like, yeah, I've had some guy friends who did that. It turned out they were jealous of our relationship. I had to cut them off. It's just not appropriate to have them around knowing their intentions were not purely platonic. I never suspected anything. I effing accepted everything she told me as plausible and even thought to myself how graceful she was in light of it. I'm not even covering half the stuff in the diary. Just blatant manipulations of other people in their lives. People she got fired by digging up dirt on them and sending it to their jobs. There were some normal entries. Basically things like trips we took and how much she loves me. Absolute night and day. She woke up from the coma days later, but had some mobility issues that are now mostly hammered out. I couldn't do anything. For months I've had to be the supportive, loving husband she knew before the accident. I've supported her through her entire recovery. I have had to act like I don't know any of this. All the while living with dread whenever someone adds me. I immediately remove them as a follower. I don't know where to go from here. If I'll ever actually confront her. I would like to think I'd have the stones to do it, but honestly, I doubt it. Thanks for listening.
I hate being a mom. First, I love my kids, ages 1 and 2, both girls, but I hate being a mom. It's so demanding and I'm getting so worn thin with all the temper tantrums. Everything is a fight for their basic human necessities, even when I try to make it fun. Getting up, getting dressed, eating, putting on their shoes, packing lunches, doing drop-off pickup, figuring out what kind of food to eat for dinner without them freaking out that they want something else. Crying because they don't want to get in the tub, crying cause they don't want to get out of the tub. Full-on tiny child wet noodle when I break out the toothbrush. Bedtime routine, holy smokes, it's just a full-out war. It's a war to try and take care of my kids and I hate it. I hate being responsible for their every need. I hate that it's such a thankless job. Even a I love you mama would make so many days worth it, but my oldest daughter's love language is not words or touch. I'm still figuring that out. I feel like every day is the same thing. I don't want to potty train. I'm not mentally ready to handle the intense resistance that we face every single day about every single thing. Today, my 2-year-old refused to put on shoes, so I let her go to daycare with no shoes on just to see how that feels, and well, she insisted. She finally caved and asked for them cause the ground obviously feels lousy in socks. My 2 back-to-back pregnancies have ruined my body, my intimate life, sleep, date nights, my identity as a woman. I don't regret having them because I love them so damn much, but sometimes I just hate being a mom. My soul is tired and I pray every morning that we will have minimal meltdowns, because the toddler meltdowns are starting to make mama have psychiatric meltdowns. Probably the lack of a full night's rest every night for the past 3 years has made me this bitter. I don't know. I feel like the worst mom in the world. Because what mom hates being a mom? I also have a full-time job, and here's the kicker. I much prefer to be working than go be a slave to my children all day. There's no sitting down. There's no eating or shitting by yourself. There's zero patience. Work, easy peasy.
My house smells like bleach, and I now know why. Waking up is always hard when you're disoriented. There's often loud sounds to force you into consciousness, and you might be jolted out of a deep sleep or a strange dream. But rarely, in some cases, you are awoken by the smell of bleach. This morning was no different, except for 2 things. 1. My alarm didn't wake me, I'm not sure what did, and 2. I smelled something faint and unexpected. Bleach. Being an insomniac, I do have bursts of random cleaning late at night, but last night wasn't one of them. I live alone in my country house way off the road, so waking up to something so obviously inexplicable was very concerning. I tried to remember if I had woken in the night and done something to cause the smell, but after a few moments of deep consideration I knew I hadn't. The reason? I was out of bleach. I got out of bed and my body hurt all over. This isn't new. I'm in my late 40s and a farmer. My lifestyle is hard on my meat suit. What was new was the unfamiliar pains in muscles I don't normally use on a regular basis. Growing concerned, I started looking around and checking the house for the source of the smell, but my 2 cows had started their crying to be milked and the rooster was crowing like mad to be let out of the coop with his flock, so I threw on clothes and got to work. Later that night, after helping my only pig birth her piglets, I was stretched out in my large deep tub to soak away the day's labors when I remembered the oddities of the morning. I pondered what it could have been about, but growing increasingly tired, I decided to try to make it an early night. I was just tired and confused. Sure, it was nothing. The next morning it happened again. This time I was woken from a deep sleep, so I was even more disoriented. It was still dark and early, but the smell was stronger. When I checked the time, I realized it was only 3 a.m. and the bleach smell was so strong it burned my nose and eyes. I got out of bed determined to find the source of this disconcerting situation, but when I put weight on my legs they buckled under me. Something was gravely wrong with my body. I called 911 to send an ambulance. I didn't know what they found until I arrived in the ER. One of my kidneys is gone. There's no evidence of a wound, no scar tissue, no evidence it was ever there to begin with. I also have somehow misplaced half my liver. Again, it's just gone. Police searched my home and property and found evidence that my pig's trough had human tissue in it. The reason I couldn't stand? A quarter of my calves in both legs are gone as well. It's like the connective tissues never existed despite all the evidence to the contrary. They are holding me for 2 days while my brother came to care for my animals. He called me this morning and told me something doesn't feel right. I asked him if he noticed anything strange, and he admitted that he woke up unexpectedly to the smell of bleach. A chill ran down my spine. I don't know what this is, how it's happening, or why, but it happened again. As I write this, my eyes and nose are burning, and the nurses are looking for the source. I'm worried what part of me is missing this time, and just how much more can be taken before there's nothing left. The bleach scent returned, overpowering my senses, causing my eyes to burn and my nostrils to sting. The worried nurses rushed to my side as my vision started to blur. The world spun around me, my heart pounded in my chest, and just as quickly, everything went dark. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in an unfamiliar room, surrounded by unfamiliar faces. Confusion clouded my mind until the lead surgeon entered the room, his face a mask of stoicism. He explained that they had discovered another organ missing, my other kidney. It had vanished without a trace, just like my liver and parts of my legs. I was stunned into silence, my mind struggling to make sense of this horrifying reality. How was this even possible? I reached for my phone, intending to call my brother, to warn him. But the call never connected, his phone was offline. A cold fear gripped me. The next morning, I awoke to the familiar scent of bleach. My heart raced as I tried to stand, but my legs were weak, my body felt lighter. A wave of nausea washed over me, a cold dread settling in the pit of my stomach. I called for the nurses, and as they pulled back the sheets, their horrified gasps confirmed my worst fears. My legs, from the knees down, were now completely gone. As the panic set in, I demanded to call my brother. A police officer entered the room, his face grave. He informed me that my brother had been found unconscious at my farm, in a similar condition. The evidence pointed to him having lost some of his organs in the same mysterious way.
Teachers, have you ever found students trying to hide that they're smart? This year, in our multiply handicapped class, we have one student, a young man in a wheelchair named A. Last year, when he first arrived, we took him at face value and according to what his IEP said, individualized educational program. Many of our students have little to no reaction when adults interact. Many don't answer to their name, turn when called, or recognize themselves in a mirror or photograph. They have serious or multiple health issues. A suffered from serious brain injury when he was young. We were told an attendant threw him to the floor. We were told A can't communicate, either verbally or point to pictures, and was very limited in what he did understand. We found out very quickly how wrong that was. A is smart, smarter than anyone in our class. He likes science and did correctly answer yes/no questions. The other students grabbed the dirt or leaves on a plant. I carefully looked at it up and down. The other class aides and I agreed his mother either was not aware of his abilities or didn't care to find out. He had tantrums when he was bored, didn't like certain activities, etc. Finally I told him, A, you're a smart guy, even if you pretend you aren't. If you want to stay at this level, that's fine, it's your choice. But if you want to be with kids who are at your level, you have to show us you're smart. And the first way is to communicate with us. Don't throw a tantrum, point to what you want. If you want to get out of the class for a walk, point at the door. If you keep having tantrums, we will have to ignore them. I kept having tantrums and we walked away from him. Finally, he started to point to the door. We allowed him to unlock his wheelchair and show us which direction he wants. He can pull himself along the wall guardrail. He has one good arm, so he can get down the hall. We have been encouraging him to get himself to the nurse, the gym, etc. with one of us walking alongside. A has been amazed that he can get himself around if he chose to do that. He is not bored as often, and because he burns up a lot of energy, he doesn't grab other students' hair or clothes as he used to. We figure we are moving on the right direction. Even if he refuses to answer simple questions, he read the word push on the water fountain and pull on the fire alarm. He set one off last year. I'm pretty sure he knows much more than he lets on. One favorite place he loves to go is the school cafeteria where he watches other kids. At first, he acted like it wasn't important, but I saw he would stop at the door and look in more and more. I took a gamble and told him, if you want to hang out with the other kids, you will need to prove you can do it. And that means answering the testing questions correctly. I made a face at me. I shrugged and said, you have the choice. Just like you can choose to move right or left, you can choose to answer questions. You aren't a baby, you need to think it over. I don't know what will happen over time, but I'm hoping A does make a good choice for himself. By the way, A's mother told us not to force him to learn if he doesn't want to, not letters, numbers, or even manners. You see, that's the crazy part. I wanted my children to be the best they can be. Well, we have 5 years with A. Let's hope for the best.